Her second book, Museum of the Weird, offers stories that develop over a few pages rather than just one or two. The winner of Fiction Collective 2's American Book Review Ronald Sukenick Prize. It's a stunning little collection that deals with everything taboo, including a woman who amputates her toes for dinner and a serial killer named God. Her third book and only novel, Threats, shows Gray's commitment to the weird as a genre. It's the story of a man whose wife is dead, at least he thinks so, who begins to find escalating threats hidden around their home that may be the key to his wife's death. But to say that makes it seem somewhat like an ordinary thriller, which it certainly isn't. It's a strange and dynamic and rather surreal book that takes us to very odd places indeed. Gray is exceptionally good at touching very lightly on the dynamics of selves and relationships in a way that rapidly unzips them and reveals the messier stuff within. She's often able to do this with just a few words, and her best stories thoroughly unsettle you before you know that she's up to anything at all. She's funny, but in a way that makes your laughter quickly die out. Her sentences are rendered with great care, and even the most acerbic or cutting moments in her prose are beautifully lyrical and delicious to read. Her latest book, Gutshot, is her strongest book yet, with not only compressed stories, but some longer, more expansive ones that get to the heart of what it means to be human, and then take that heart thoroughly apart. It contains 38 uncanny, surprising stories that always keep you a little off balance. As the New York Times Book Review has suggested, quote, reading Gutshot is a little like being blindfolded and pelted from all sides with fire, jello, and the occasional live animal. Please join me in welcoming Amelia Gray and prepare to be pelted.
That's a threat. Should have brought some tiny things to throw to my starts. What's the smallest dangerous object? Oh, I've got a few. Now I'm depressed. Okay. So I think that I'm going to try to, I can project, so I don't do that the whole time. I'm going to read the first couple pages of my new novel, which makes me want to barf. The act of reading, not the novel itself. It's one of those things, I'm sure you all have been in similar places. I'm in the middle of like editing, like really densely editing, pulling tiny things out and putting tiny things in, and like kind of futzing around until I get the very most ideal version of the paragraph, and then cutting the paragraph entirely, and you start to feel a little bit insane. So I'm gonna read a little bit, just kind of like to take myself out of the like sewer that I've dug myself into with it. So the book briefly, it's about Isadora Duncan. She's the mother of modern dance. This book takes place between April 1912, when her two children drown in the river Seine, and August of 1914. And so it's just a very brief period in her life. She would be alive for 10 more years, so it doesn't deal with her own dramatic end. But it's kind of a meditation on loss and the children and these two babies and children and love and all that stuff. Okay, so this is very opening. So far, if you're reading the book, you will have read a brief introduction to 1912 and how it's this kind of incredible time to be alive. Everything was coming towards like artistic and invention and spiritual and emotional. Everything's kind of coming to a head, and people thought that there would be this kind of great new world that would break out. Instead, it was a great new war for everybody, and or almost everybody. And then the children died. So this is the prologue. The little one ate toast and cheese and kissed the cloth with buttered lips. The older chose a soup and sipped it plaintive from her spoon. Napkin in her lap, poor love, ever obedient, white lace twitching in the breeze. This crumb-coated pair, arms lifting for mama, only know to take in love and churn it out again, offered up, still warm from their hands, the soft shell of their delicate nails. What is love but fingernails and backward glances? picking the pills from lace laid square at her neck and smoothing with spit the cotton rose pinned over her heart. White socks and soft shoes, sleeves like diving bells. The tailor blessed this dress and wished her well, stitching her name into its seam. Deirdre, ever serious, minding her manners while the grown-ups talk. Her brother Patrick, fresh as a festival field. Buttered baby in a high seat, soles of his kicking feet soft as a cap's new cheek, flower-skinned in curls, knowing without lesson the whole of love in its golden waves. Patrick of the rumpled pleats framed in red wicker, his sweetheart mouth, that handsome hair. He fusses when his toast is gone and gnaws the cloth his papa uses to swab his face. There's a winsome pop, collar sharp and tied. The man feels most at home in a city which bears and shares his name, a proud piece of him inked on every calling card, cut into door frames and hanging signs as greeting and deference in one, Paris. He came here as a sweet young man and grew to become as hungry and moneyed as the city itself, as damp-spirited in the mornings, as shining after dark. He cleans his son, then takes up the late edition, twisting his thick ring as he reads the onyx, a gift to himself for his most recent birthday, rare only in the sense that he doesn't usually need an excuse for extravagance. Men of the Neuve sur Seine retreat at the sight of him. They crowd the corners of the cafe, hands to their lopsided mouths. The body is a column. It begins with each foot steady in the dirt, rock-long fastened to the ankle, shin to knee bearing the pelvis, that busy fulcrum, friend to the waist, spanning wing from root, the cup of power and the seat of it. The belly and back, foundation to the trunk, its sternum a wagging tongue, and there, buried in the rib like a line of charged powder, the solar plexus. Its pulsing ray powers far-flung satellites of the heart, hands and mind, belly and breast, shoulder and sex, willing the feet to move, the body a churning machine. Any cafe in the world is a constellation of these rays, a sea of waves, cut with men bearing cakes and tea on silver trays, a gleam through the drizzling spring. The head waiter distinguishes himself immediately from the rest. The tallest among them, he works the patio on his toes to avoid ladies' skirts and discarded silver, dogs using their own thin leashes to strangle themselves among chair legs, baguettes upended from inexact baskets, 3 pigeons angling at a forgotten slice of steak, a nosegay trampled to a purple smear, and a pat of butter rolled in a grime comprised of chalk dust from the specials board, the dried mess from a practical-minded prostitute, and half a handful of sand from Sauce Le Pain hitched on the suitcase of an old man who has just this afternoon returned for the last time from the sea. The waiter leans benevolent, a cypress holding cord over scrub, gracing the service with a subtle pot of tea, its silver spout an extension of his hand. He slides a delicate cup without comment out of baby's reach. His vest cinches with a polished clip, but he is otherwise unadorned. Collar loose at the gentle skin of his neck, shoes free of hook and eyelet, hands bare to the unlinked cuff of his whites. His chin cradles the thin rind of his lips, brow line carved with the blade of a boning knife. He draws a silver file from his vest, easing crumbs into his cupped hand before he slips away. Following him means keeping close as he goes, dodging lesser staff as they go in their inarticulate way. The head waiter moves with such an exceptional grace that he becomes nearly invisible, only seen by the one tucked into his wake. The cafe's interior is a slick-walled cave of bolsters and peeling paper, a single electric lamp losing its fight against the darkness of the back room. The lamp illuminates an empty booth, where a pile of cloth napkins await folding beside a bowl of soup. By the booth, a banister from which a painted white birdcage hangs. 2 wood-carved lovebirds touch beaks in a permanent state of distant affection. The stairs above them rise to another floor growing darker, windows painted shut beside another set of stairs which lead in silence to the attic, where only the wet jewel of a rat's eye glitters to witness the door which leads to a single cot and basin in a room where the waiter sleeps. The day the other waiters find the man dead, they will bury him in the back under a sack of flour and say no more about it, and his grave's only visitors will be the rats bringing him their own dark offering. The waiter examines a haze of sickly tarts under glass, selecting a square of lemon cake on paper lace. Pastry and tray make a slight communal jostle as he discovers a warm hand on his stomach. It moves with enough leisure to belong to him, but with his own hands in sight, this third is curiously foreign. Searching for a witness, he only finds the wooden birds, noting the fluted divots down their backs, lines their maker bestowed at the very end, feeling something missing. The strange hand is joined by a second, and the pair slide across his slim hips. In watching the birds, he misses when his silver file is slipped away, a souvenir, before the hands twin themselves around his trunk, spreading to root at his waist. The lemon cake shudders on its tray as the woman ducks under his outstretched arm and ranges herself before him. He sees her shoulders first, broad and bare, around a garment he realizes with some amusement is a tunic. The skin at her shoulders is the precise color and texture his father would call sandstone, a red-veined sunset. He wants to chart her map of veins in his traveler's memory, hands crossing her expanse like the silent sea keeping him from America, in which his father, who sold stones to sculptors, once found by touch in a wet-walled cave a Yule marble more rare than any tactless chunk of gold. The stone was parceled off, save for a piece the size of his father's fist, which the old man saved and laid into their hearthstone as proof of his superior skill. A daily reminder to his son, born with the man's ears but not his gift, dull-eyed in the cradle, like a fish, his mother said, though here it seems the son has found a monument that would make his old man dash rasp and hammer to the ground. Okay. That's all for the prologue. Let me just circle one little thing. Thanks for listening to that. It's getting close, would you say? Okay. The things they never get, the new things never get old. So they do. Maybe I'll read a little more of that later, but I think I'm going to read some of Gutshot. Here's a story about swans. The swan as metaphor for love. A swan's foot, like a duck's, is a webbed claw. In traversing swan shit and mud, these claws naturally gunk up and reek. Nobody in the history of the world, save another swan, has licked a swan's foot while that foot was still attached to the swan. The feet resemble rabid bats in their sickly color and texture. Moving north on the swan's undercarriage, one will find an eroded civilization of swan shit and pond scum. This is a banal phrase, pond scum, one that is easily ignored, but look closer. Swans eat grasses, sedges, and pondweed, each teeming with murk. They will also eat insects, snails, and a fresh shrimp if they're near one. Pond scum is more of the same. Swan shit, fish shit, frog shit, half a can of beer poured by some fuck teenager, plastic, photosynthetic residue, algae, permanent bubble, hexagon patch freed from its soccer ball, arthropod corpse. All attached to the swan in its idiot float through its stagnant little inland sea. Swans eat tadpoles. A swan will slurp up entire schools of larval amphibians, process them, and shit them out. And then sometimes it will sit in the shit or walk through it. And here we are. Anyone who claims that a swan is a majestic and noble creature has never seen a swan up close. Swans will attack you if you are nearing their young or their nest, if you are trying to have a conversation with their mate. They have jagged points on their beaks, which resemble teeth, but more closely resemble a plumber's saw, which plumbers call a tiny gin. If you try to take a swan's picture, he will strike you with his beak. Too much intention enrages a swan. The swan has a long neck and will strike at you. The swan will bite you and tear your flesh. Swans mate for life, which is maybe 10 or 15 years. Someone found a swan that was 24 years old, and probably it was mating for life, which everyone made a big deal out of, even though the swan was not even old enough to rent a car. The The Swan wasn't yet acquainted with life enough to silently hyperventilate in its bed. The Swan didn't even have a bed. The Swan was too stupid to have a bed, and if it did, it would fill the bed with swan shit. That's all for today about swans. I think I'll read one about South Texas. The story is a true story, but only in one very small part. It's called These Are the Fables. We were in the parking lot of a Dunkin Donuts in Beaumont when I told Kyle. I figured I'd rather be out under God as I announced all the reason for all my illness and misery. I said, well, shit, guess we're having a baby. Let me see, Kyle said, frowning at the test for a second before tossing it into a planter. He flipped the double deuce to a stranger who had set his coffee down to applaud. People these days, Kyle said. I said, my folks would be happy. Here's the thing, though, he said. Your folks are dead, and I have a warrant out for my arrest, and you're 40 years old. And I am addicted to getting tattoos, and our air conditioner's broke, and you are drunk every day, and all I ever want to do is fight and go swimming. And I am addicted to Keno, and you are just covered in hair, and I've never done a load of laundry in my entire life, and you are still technically married to my dealer, and I refuse to eat vegetables, and you can't sleep unless you're sleeping on the floor, and I am addicted to heroin, and honest to God, you've got big tits, but you make a shitty muse, and we are in Beaumont. I said that these were minor setbacks on the road to glory, and, he added, that Dunkin Donuts is on fire. Indeed it was. Customers streamed from the doors carrying wire baskets of bear claws, trucker hatfuls of sprinkled munchkins. Get out of here, one of the patrons said. The damn thing is going up. Listen, I said, we're going to have to make it work. We'll forge a life on our own, and the child will lead us. Good plan. The wall of donuts had fueled a mighty grease fire. The cream-filled variety sizzled and popped. Each ignited those within proximity. Their baskets glowed and charred. The coffee machine melted. The smoke was blue and smelled like a dead bird. I popped the lid off Kyle's coffee cup and puked into it. All I had wanted that morning was an old-fashioned and the absence of puke. I said that everything would be all right, that we were living in the best of all possible Dunkin Donuts parking lots. He pushed some dirt over the test with the toe of his boot. Poor thing, he said. Between his sensitive nose and sour stomach, we both knew that the next 9 months, plus the 18 to 22 years after that, would wreak some manner of havoc. I put the coffee cup on the ground because the trash bin inside was consumed by flames. He took my hand, and we got out of there before the cops showed up to the fire and started checking IDs. He stopped at the Kroger and came out with half a dozen roses, which he laid between us on the dash. Let's get back to the Rio Grande, he said. I tipped my seat back and dug into sleep while he took the tollway. The coast was speckled with cities with names that would suit the spines on a grandma's bookshelf. Sugar Land, Blessing, Point Comfort, Victoria. We ended up at the Days Inn in Corpus. Kyle examined a road map in his underpants while I took the bucket to the ice machine. A crowd of tourists were standing in the laundry room. They were speaking languages. The young woman touched my ice bucket. We were looking for where Selena was murdered, she said. I said I didn't know what she meant. 15 years ago at this very Days Inn, the woman said, I am disappointed in you. An older woman was leaned up against the ice machine. She had her face pressed into her hands and her hands pressed into the ice machine. They won't tell us where, the younger one said. They changed the numbers on the doors, so we won't find out. She pulled me close. There are secrets at this Days Inn, she said. I said that there were secrets at every Days Inn. The ice machine was broken, and the women wailed for unrelated reasons. Our angel, one of them said. She was holding a gilt-framed photograph of Selena singing on stage. She did resemble an angel. I went in to lie down on the laundry room floor. In the room, Kyle was eating a waffle the shape of Texas and reading the syrup packet. I stood in the open doorway. The first ingredient is corn syrup, he said. He was a shadow in the back of the long room in his button shirt and a clean pair of pants. He had a shaving kit out on the table. He said, "The second ingredient is high fructose corn syrup." I told him that he looked like he was preparing for a funeral. They say the hotel room floors have E. coli, but I lay down anyway. Kyle came and settled near me. When he pressed his cheek against my belly, I could feel the machine motion of his jaw, grinding tooth on tooth. I said, "These are the fables we will tell our child." There are actually a couple true things in it, but only one's true in my church. I think I'll read a little more of the book now, because that was thrilling, and then it's over, and I'm going to do it again. Okay, so that was at the beginning of the prologue. I hope it was clear. Let me know later if it's not. But they're having it's Isadora and the children and her lover Paris, singer, is they're having lunch with the children, and then you later find that that's kind of the last time they all see each other, and then see the children live. So then this is chapter 1. So in theory, nothing else has to be revealed, but let's find out if that's actually true. Okay. And I think I'm going to have all the chapters have sort of like headers. So this one is, on a sunny street in the Paris neighborhood of Neuilly-sur-Seine, I also have to learn how to pronounce that, Neuilly-sur-Seine, Paris singer takes a dire inventory of their flat. Okay. None of it turned out as he had imagined. He blamed this on his own distraction, which kept him from looking too closely at the details when his agent found the place. There had been problems at the time with the old way house in Paynton, and in the way a simple pendulum swing can describe the boundaries of a man's entire life, his attention to one meant neglect for the other. At Old Way, Paris had sunk months into negotiations on the new wing and the art to fill it, the gardens, which would need a season to seed, there would be no spring party, the girls would be disappointed, and all of it had made him eager to find something simple in France, somewhere close to the theater district, but not so close that they were sleeping in the wings. He wanted it ready to move in, large enough for the children to have their own room. He allowed his local agent to convince him to look for furnished flats. Working out the details personally would have ensured a more precise result, but his agent made the point that as much as they would have all liked to see it, they truly didn't need the chaise to be covered in worsted serge so that Isadora, reclining, might resemble a handkerchief laid across the breast of a royal officer. Paris meant to trust people more, and as an exercise, he allowed the local man to make the arrangements. And so, of course, he arrived in November to find his rented flat on the 3rd floor of a thin-walled walk-up, the soft wood of the stairs sinking under his feet. The door was painted thickly shut in its frame, and he had to throw his weight against it to crack it open, revealing a junk man's collection of musty furniture and fittings scattered across a dismal set of rooms, a cemetery view on 2 sides, and an ominous spot on the kitchen floor which smelled strongly of kerosene. In the children's room, an old window had been jammed open and nailed into place, ensuring the bitter cold and the street's black ash would leave a leaden crust on their beds, and playthings and a ribbon of filth would ring the tub after every bath. The only advantage he saw at the time was the view of the river, which wound its way across the west-facing windows. Isadora seemed to appreciate the jagged strips of half-torn wallpaper, speaking brightly of the bohemian aspect of the place, and going on about her early days in Europe, though later, when she couldn't find a proper punch bowl, she sank into a malaise which required 3 days and a trip to Printemps to cure. They stayed through the winter, stuffing rags into the children's open window to keep out the cold. The nurse reported that the children had invented a game they called Urchin, wherein they covered themselves in soot from the toy chest and spent many happy hours cleaning the fireplace. Patrick was too young to understand the game, but Deirdre was an observant one, and though the nurse tried her best to press little Lord Fauntleroy and other manner texts into her hands, she was only interested in the children she saw in alleys, speculating constantly about their lives and begging the poor humiliated nurse to introduce them. Deirdre naturally had decided the other children were also playing a game, that they already had their breakfast and would run around and dirty themselves heroically like this until they were all well tired, at which point they might find their nurse and go home to have a rest before the afternoon lessons. Leaving Isadora to deal with it in her disinterested way, Paris spent most of February addressing labor concerns at the factory in London and returned again in March, hating the flat even more on his second arrival. It was worse than a hotel, where at least the things were cared for and a pleasant anonymity kept him from taking his surroundings to heart. In a hotel, broken dishes would be cleared and thrown away, but Isadora liked to keep shards of china in a paper bag on the counter. She talked vaguely of arranging the delicate filigreed pieces to make something even finer than what was broken, but she had no technique for it, and the bag ultimately gathered more of the ever-present black soot as it waited for its chance to upend shards over whichever child found it first. Paris found himself staring at that bag of broken dishes that awful afternoon in April on the day the children drowned. After the accident, half the city came to gather at the flat. He was forced to welcome everyone with hasty sandwiches, watching humiliated as they took appraisal of the place. To distract himself from their judgment, he tried to remember the old catalog of fears he had once felt for the children's safety. The bag of broken plates, for example. He always thought one of them would turn over their heads, ceramic shards working into their eyes. He was certain that Patrick would squeeze himself through the open window, or that Deirdre would choke on a button in the back of the closet where she liked to hide. When they went off with their nurse to the park, he thought of the trees mangling lower branches, steep drops from rocky ledges, and the broken, and was never fully soothed even when they returned home, as safely as they always had. Never a broken bone, and hardly even any scrapes. Isadora had always teased him for his concern, but in the end he was right about the agony which lay ahead. It was as if he had known all along. The accident happened early in the afternoon after lunch. Paris had enjoyed a satisfactory pot au feu with beer. The other patrons exercised their usual theatrical shock over the children seated among them, but they all looked away when Paris turned to confront anyone directly. Isadora seemed near tears when she returned from the ladies' room, and he understood the feeling of endless scrutiny. With lunch coming to an end, they worked out the schedule for the rest of the day. She wanted to return to her studio, citing some vague assignment which would keep her there for hours. It was obvious when she wanted them all to leave her alone. But Paris didn't want to be saddled with the children either, quite literally, as ever since Deirdre's father, Ted Craig, had uncovered a pint-sized saddle in some filthy Florence shop, the girl took every opportunity to strap Paris in and goad him across the hardwood. So he ordered their nurse, Annie, to take them home for a rest, and trusted without adding that she'd tidy the place before he returned. The afternoon settled. They parted with kisses. Isadora went one way up the street, Paris went the other, and the children went with the nurse to their death. Looking out his office window, he saw an officer running in a sprint, pushing gentlemen and ladies aside and calling for someone to open the door. For God's sake, there's been an accident. Listening to the officer taking the stairs two at a time, Paris felt his dread solidify into a known quantity, an object before him as sure as the paperweight on his desk. When his wide-eyed secretary let the officer in and he delivered the news, panting while he spoke and tugging desperately at his collar like it might constrict and strangle him, Paris experienced an emotion so terrible it physically pained him, and he wanted to carve out his own heart with the golden spike he used to open his letters. It was relief, he felt, plain as the day. The tragedy he knew would ruin him had come at last, and he didn't have to dread it any longer. The children and their nurse had been riding in the back of the car when it stalled. There was some trouble with the engine, an issue Paris had known about and should have had fixed. He and the driver had spoken of it just the week before. They talked in a dismissive way, passing the time as they waited for Isadora to come down. That would have been the moment to act. Paris wondered how many decisive moments he had missed in the course of his life, and how often their results would prove to be as devastating as this. When the car stalled that fatal afternoon, the driver thought nothing of it. He left it in gear when he got out to crank, and it wasn't long before the engine roared to life. Suddenly, the car lurched forward, nearly running him over in the process. He had failed to block the tire or account for the angle of the road, and the whole cursed thing rolled across the street, lurched over the thin ridge of the curb, and tipped face first into the river, where it bobbed once and sank like a fat stone 10 meters down. The officer told him all of this on the walk between the office and the flat, having taken the report from the driver. He seemed particularly pleased about the fat stone bit the officer did and opined that the whole automotive craze was too dangerous for women and children. A letter would arrive from the driver a few weeks later, but Paris threw it away, the other man's grief too great to bear. Back at the flat, he learned someone was bringing Isadora from her studio, and she arrived a few minutes after he did to find 20 of their neighbors moving nervously from room to room, all of them wearing their street shoes. When they brought her in, the room's nervous conversation dwindled to silence. Isadora put her bag down by the door and looked around, uncertain why everyone was there and why they all seemed to be waiting for her to speak. But where did they go? She asked. The women around her collapsed into hysterical tears, and she reached for them, confused. Paris thought that she had lost her mind entirely, but it turned out her question was only natural. The neighbor who brought her only said the children were gone. Finally, someone told her, whispering in her ear. She brought her hands to her face. Looking around the room, she found him in the crowd, and her expression was so altered by the horror of it that she was a stranger to him. The room started up again, as if everyone was suddenly ashamed by their own witness, and Paris was swept away by the details of the coming days. There was the official inquest, the coroner's report, the press had a particular interest, and then the public events. There would be a viewing, a ceremony, and internment. The downstairs neighbor kept trying to get Isadora to eat. He added it to his list of things to do, along with choosing music for the funeral program and setting up a meeting with the coroner, but the neighbor wouldn't let up. She followed him into the children's room and watched while he dug among the dolls and books until he found a cup from Deirdre's tea set, rubbing the soot from it with the corner of her bedspread and leaving a black mark on the quilt. This further upset the neighbor, who fussed over the mark, spitting on it and rubbing it onto herself, which only served to set the stain. Defeated, the neighbor turned her attention to the little cup, remarking that confronting Madame with the child's things so soon might damage her in a way which might become permanent. Paris dismissed the idea. Miss Duncan would be all right, he said, careful to stress her unmarried name, as he always did with people he didn't trust. The formality inspired a comfortable decorum, and anyway, he reasoned to himself, Isadora was far too strong to be felled by a symbol. Finally, the woman left, taking the teacup with her and leaving the quilt behind for the maids. I heard her calling for Isadora in the other room, employing a tone of voice which suggested she was trying to do her best to coax the other woman into a cage. The press report arrived with the late edition, and someone read it aloud. The three inside could be heard screaming pitifully for just a moment before they went silent, and though a number of men dove in at their own peril after the car, Paris knew this to be true, having personally shaken the wet hands of those would-be heroes, their actions came with no results. The current was too strong, the water dark and cold. Afternoon sunk into evening. Women poured wine into Isadora's teacup, and she drank it daintily, asking for more. They presented her with sandwiches from the shop window, which she mostly ignored. When she refused food on the second day, they mixed a little melted butter into her wine, and she took it just the same. While she was turning her nose up at cheese and charcuterie, Paris dealt with the inquest against the driver. He thought that learning more about the mechanics behind the accident would bring him some peace, but it only troubled him more. He returned again and again to their casual conversations about the engine, and remembered saying nothing on other occasions when he saw the driver leave the car in gear. He pitied the man, who was no doubt grieving in a lonelier room, his children looking up at him with wide and wondering eyes that would soon enough hold the knowledge of what their father had done. And through it all, the flowers. They came by the cartload, and visitors arriving with their own bouquets were instantly shamed to silence by the cut garden which greeted them, every countertop and closet in full bloom. Isadora made a path through a pile of white lilies on the floor, calling for more wine in her little cup, though she knew full well where it was kept and could pour it herself. It disturbed Paris to see her so obedient, but it did give him the freedom to arrange things without her getting in the way. The days bled together. He thought pleasantly of an hour draining into a surgical tray. He prepared himself for the coroner's early report, which arrived in a crisp ivory envelope, and remarked on the water in the children's lungs and the fact that they were found clutching Annie which Paris took to mean they had learned enough of death to fear it. It wasn't specified in the report, but he heard from the coroner's assistant that the strength of the nurse's grip in death was such that 2 men had to use an iron bar to pry her off the children, and that the prying broke both her arms, and though she had been dead for 12 hours, the coroner still set them in splints as if they might somehow mend. Paris wanted to keep Isadora from all of this, and so saw it that she spent the afternoon writing letters and taking a series of luxurious baths, which seemed just fine with her. The women kept her teacup filled until she was quite well tippled, and soon enough she took on the affect of a lesser monarch receiving local dignitaries, propped up in an overstuffed armchair to hear condolences from her friends and neighbors, from gossips, well-wishers, officers, and aspiring members of the artistic community, everyone coming through to say their piece and touch her hand. She entertained them all, swaying a bit in her seat as she fingered the hem of her robe where a golden tassel was affixed with golden thread. Paris watched her, pretending to listen to a group of nurses as she smoothed the tassel until it was slick as a lock of young hair. He imagined the tassel slipping from her fingers and wrapping around the knot which formed in his throat as he listened to her talk about the children in a low voice as if they were only asleep in the other room. Okay, thanks. I'll take some questions at this point.
Questions?
First off, some more.
I was curious about the decision to name the character Paris.
Paris. Yeah, it was his actual name. And
Oh.
yeah, and that's the short answer. But it was really difficult because for a couple reasons. One is that I stubbornly don't like the Paris apostrophe S, Paris's, and so I don't think that maybe appears once when I couldn't avoid it, but it's like 120,000 words of avoiding Paris apostrophe S. It's my own thing. And then the other thing is that he's in Paris half the time, and so it was kind of like getting it out of the way in the prologue, that line about the city which bears and shares his name. As an attempt to be like, I did that on purpose, do you like it? When the reality was, it's just, he was the son of Isaac Singer, the sewing machine magnate, inventor of the sewing machine. He was incredibly wealthy. And Isaac, who had 24 children, named his first son Paris because he liked the city, I think. Yeah.
What called you to that?
I was writing, this was 2012, and I was asked by a magazine to write about my favorite it girl, and I didn't want to write about like the ones, I don't know, I didn't want to write about Amelia Earhart because that seemed a little navel-gazing, even though she is like maybe my favorite it girl. And I want to write about Clara Bow. I didn't, and then I was like, oh, I think I like Isadora, but all I knew about her was the like insane way that she died with the scarf and the wheel and food, and you know, she had go to glory, that kind of thing. So I wanted to read more about her, and it was just, I was in Toronto at the time. It was this incredibly cold winter, and I was reading about the children and her just kind of, you know, she was 36 when they died, which is crazy, and to think about. And you know, she was one of the most famous women in the world, and the more I read about her, kind of the more fascinated I was. And I didn't know anything about dancing. I'm not a dancer. I never studied dance, and I hadn't even read Dancing, Comic Handbook at the time. I just knew nothing. But it was something about like the way she danced, and you know, was kind of in direct opposition to ballet, which is so rigid. But her form of dancing was also rigid, but in a very like studied, practiced, like natural way, which is kind of my jam. So I think then I was like in between like the tragedy and how she was as a character, and and that's sort of her aesthetic artistically. I was like, all right, I think I want to try writing about it. And the prologue was the first thing I wrote, which was kind of rare, kind of weird. But the more I learned about her, the more I wrote, the more I was interested in her. Very complicated. So yeah, that's how I came to it. Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about the different challenges between writing short pieces and novel-length pieces?
Yeah, totally. Because I read you guys kind of one of my shortest in here, the Swan story. And then this is very, very long. I find, so God, can you imagine the Swan thing as a novel? you can kind of see in hindsight, but even in advance, that like the concept is a certain size. Whenever I'm writing, I'm always sort of like, I write less than some. Some people kind of write a lot, expansive, and then cut back. I write less, and then I kind of come back and like add to it. But I always go into it saying like, I'm gonna write the longest story about swans. Like I was like, this is gonna be a 5-part lecture straight up about swans, like as metaphor for love. And I was enjoying this kind of funny thing about like, I write fiction and yet I obsessively research. I was writing the novel at the time and going nuts about freaking pre-war research. I was like, I'm gonna write a story about swans that reads like it's really well researched, but is just totally made up. And I thought that would be hilarious, and it didn't go, yeah. And I just like wanted a lecture series, and I got like 500 words. But it's like AMPM, my first book, I was like, what was my thought? I pictured like an 800-page book. Like I wanted this incredible, insane, like, and then that was the year she began, like the tomb or something like that. And I wrote that for 2 months, and then that was it. I edited it for another year and a half. But like, you know, I think I always come in with big ambitions, but then as it goes on, it starts to kind of take the shape that I think it ends up being. But yeah, the novel, because Threats was, I'm obsessed with word count because I started off as a marketing writer and was paid by the word. So I know all word counts, which is not generally, I don't know, I've found that people kind of don't think this way, but like Threats came in at 57,000 words, came in at 60,000, almost even 60,005, and edited down to 57,000, and I thought this would be about like that, like a book, and then it came in at 125,000, and so it was like, as I was going, I was like, oh, well, we have to tell this and this and this, and then in a practical sense, it just kept going. Yeah.
A lot of your stories that we read in Gutshot, which we love, are really concept-driven, like the Swan story. And I'm just wondering, do you have a specific pattern that you work with? Like, do you start with a concept? Like, when you're thinking of the Swan story, you're like, oh, a lecture series on swans, that would be really funny, and then the story kind of grew out of that? Or does it start with just something else?
Yeah. It's when the shorter ones particularly are start with that like kind of simple idea, like a device. Device is about the machine which kind of predicts the future but is incredibly dull, which is the kind of genre, same genre as Gutshot, where Jesus comes down and says that the future is pretty dull. There's like, these modes that I keep kind of exploring in different ways at different points in my life, but there's often sort of the same deal happening. But it's like, okay, device. As scientists, I'm obsessed with scientists, or was when I was writing this. It's like, kind of rationalizing the emotional world, which is basically what I spend 100% of my time trying to do. And all right, so he's going to rationalize the future, and then it's going to be dull, and it's going to disappoint him, but it'll be fine. And so I just kind of come at that from a bunch of different angles. And that's sort of how it is with the short ones. I'm seeing if I'm wrong. Like date night. Like with date night, I wanted to write a story about like an awkward date, and that was not concept driven. It's not, because it ends up being about like the inside of us is all the same, and it's this incredible glowing light, and holy shit, that's life, and it's a super good idea. I mean, it's super optimistic, and I really loved when I was like, oh my god, yeah, because I just started off with this like crummy, like crappy date. When people are just like awkwardly like trying to live their lives and everyone's sweating and like turning their forks over, it's gross. And then it's like, oh, but there's like a little bit, there's like a little under your skin, if you can get under there, then you're good. So that was like, as I was writing it, I found that to be true. It's like, so I guess the short version is that it's sometimes a combination. Sometimes I go from like a strange idea, because dates are so strange, and then finding like, oh, what's the thing about it though? And then sometimes I go from an idea I'm trying to explore, like, okay, like the future is unknowable and yet ultimately like knowable in some like larger, duller sense. Yeah, it's kind of a combo. Yeah.
How's the process been writing a nonfiction or a research-based book?
Yeah, historical fiction. It's crazy. It's really weird, and I don't know why I did it. But in the sense that I was really interested in the genre without having experienced any of it or much of it. I had just read that book, The General and His Labyrinth, which I really liked, but also found to be pretty airless. Who did that? Marquez? Yeah. Freaking like cool book, but he got like he researched it down to like the moon cycles are correct. The boat is correct. The like type of hammocks that they were in is right, and you can kind of tell. And so in writing it, I wanted to see how much I could get away with not knowing, and yet come at a genre that's pretty saturated with historically accurate pre-war texts and not look like some idiot. So it was kind of an interesting combo. I really like research, so that was kind of helpful. But like, there's so much about Isadora. There's so much about 1912. There's a little bit of writing about Paris, and so it's like, to look at all that stuff and then kind of do like a that and then write a book was interesting. So I would do weird stuff, like I'd figure out where their actual flat was in that neighborhood, and I'd look at it on Google Maps, which is obviously just the modern version, and then I'd kind of try to picture it as kind of like grungy, and then I would write. And so it's like, I didn't know if they were on the third floor, like what it was like. I don't know if it was furnished. Just seems like that would be something that would piss a guy like Paris off. And you kind of get a sense of, I'm really always interested in like what characters in that time would be reading. Like the kids would be, there's like Little Lord Fauntleroy was just after the golden age of children's literature. It's a really like kind of magical time to be a child. They probably would have a game like Urchin. Everything would seem charmed if you were an incredibly rich child. And so, yeah. So it was like, it's interesting. I'm really curious to see what the vibe is going to be like taking this book on tour, because this stuff is just not right. I made it up. And already as I've been talking a little about the book, I hear a lot of like, well, have you read this? Have you read that book? Have you read Dancer? Or whatever. And it's like born out of this, I don't know, a very human desire to connect with the reality. I have never gotten that before as like a weird writer. People have never been like, have you read the Neil Carnes? Like from an audience, and I always thought that would be the case, that I'd have to study to become like an absurdist writer, but it's like a very laid back crowd. I think historical fiction is going to be a little different, and I'm just going to have to do the like. But I'm not the first person who's done it. I think the guy who wrote that Patrick DeWitt book, the Sisters Brothers, is also straight off the top of his ass, and so it's cool. I'm not the first one to do it.
Can you talk about the Ulysses S. Grant story in Gutshot and whether you researched that?
Oh yeah. I did research the heck out of that. Is that true? Yes, it is. I was writing that for a project about presidents, and a bunch of people were doing what did you do?
No.
Yeah, it's just like, yeah, they would have been lucky now. But it was like a Melville House project, and everyone got a president, and I a thing about Ulysses S. Grant, and then I kind of I wanted to see like what the White House looked like at the time. I think I'm sensing a pattern in my research. I looked at a picture of the historical White House. I read a little bit about Ulysses S. Grant. You kind of read like half looking at it a little bit. You don't want to, or I don't want to read like research, like writing everything down exactly, because it like saps all of my energy out of it. But if I kind of am looking at it and I see like, oh, they called him the butcher, like that's interesting, right? Like, huh. And like his wife, who he was apparently like deeply in love with, they had this huge love affair. She had like a lazy eye. They call it a walleye at the time. They're like, oh, that's neat. And they called him butcher, and he was an unrepentant drunk. And the White House was sort of like not totally finished yet. So that's sort of like what I started from. And then I have him, carving is it chicken? Something like that, like a bird.
Yeah, it's a bird.
Yeah, it's a bird. Yeah. In the sitting outside with rye and just kind of looking at like the empire kind of half created. So for me it was like looking halfway at something and kind of going from there, and then being able to untether myself a little bit from like the reality of it and people's concerns therein. It helped a little bit. I wrote my novel Threats is about an esthetician who married a dentist, and I really overdid the research on dentistry. I think I did enough esthetician research. That was more fun. But the dentistry stuff, I was like, history of dentistry, Sumerians, like, it was interesting. Like, I really went back to the Sumerian era, no doubt. Like, the Germans and the Sumerians, in like thousands of years apart, had the same idea that our teeth, when they had cavities, were full of worms. Like literal worms, sometimes from hell, sometimes just worms. And people made these really cool like carvings of teeth that would open up, and there would be like demon worms inside. Highly recommend a Google image search on that. And I was really proud of that research, and it was ready for people to like congratulate me on it or something. And the only people that ever mentioned it, I did an interview with a dental hygienist in Southern California, and the question was, is that stuff true? I was like, yes. That was it. So I was kind of like, after I was sort of not rewarded for the research, I said like, okay, well, how much can I get away with, I guess? Yeah.
You have a very precise prose style. I'm wondering, can you talk about A, how you developed that style, and B, are you influenced by other writers, and who might they be?
Yeah, I have it feels kind of hellishly developed right now. But thank you. It sort of depends what I am going for at the time. For the shorter stuff, I'm really into Don Bartholomew and Russell Edson and aforementioned Daniel Carms and Calvino, and just like very straightforward. Some Nabokov. For the longer stuff, like the perfect sentences, other Nabokov, DeLillo. There's some good, really long lines. Joyce Carol Oates, David Foster Wallace. I mean, but it's like it's sort of like seeing a long sentence work and feeling how I feel when I read it, and being like, how do I do that? That's cool. And then kind of like coming at an idea and sort of trying to take it as long as I can, failing at that, splitting things up. There was a whole draft I did where I was just putting periods in the middle of paragraphs. Because in the same way as like, oh, I'm going to write an 800-page AM, PM tome, I wanted to write like the longest lines. I like wanted, and the idea was like take the reader on like a journey, you know, from like the first part of the page to another page, or maybe another chapter entirely. The prologue used to be one sentence, and man, it was cool, but it did not make sense. And there's sometimes you do that like to kind of screw around with the reader, the reader's expectations, or because when you're reading, I found anyway when I'm reading, there's like a holding your breath kind of thing, and it's a pleasurable sensation sometimes to be like continue, you know, which is like music, which is like anything, but like I decided that my interest in saying things and saying real things was greater than my interest in making technically correct, beautiful lines. Sometimes I go for the line. But yeah, it's a really it's a good question. It's a really nebulous question because it's sort of like, you know, sometimes with shorter concept stuff, I want to get the idea so clear that my lines are super clear, super short. Like you could read it on a milk carton kind of short. And then sometimes when the short stuff is really voicey, like I wrote a story, it's not in Gutshot, it's newer, about 5 demon boys named Tad who were legion, and it's from the point of view of Tad. And that's kind of a hard thing to express in short lines, and it's also a short thing, so it's like a really voicey, like one sentence, like kind of balls to the wall sort of tone. So again, sort of similar to the earlier ideas, like the idea sort of dictates the form. Yeah.
I really liked Gutshot and the tone in that collection of stories, like especially how you made use of like the grotesque and violence and things like that. And I wonder, when you're compiling like a collection of short stories, is that sort of something that you keep in mind? Like you want the reader to experience like perhaps a reaction. You know, is that something you try to keep consistent through each story? And like, does it affect the way you arrange the stories? Things like that.
Yeah. It does. I will say, arranging stories is it feels the most. It's at the part of the editing when I feel like I should know this the most and I do know it the least. like it seems so obvious, especially in a collection. It's like, I should know what order these freaking things are in. This doesn't make sense. And with Gutshot, it was in random order until the last night I had the book to edit. And then I just printed it out and, you know, put it around my room. There's a lot of stories, like 38 stories. Arranged on like the countertop and the ironing board and the bed and the floor, and then I was like, all right, like what even are these? Like, what's going on here? So it was kind of like what I had written in the past 5 years, minus like 5 stories that were not good, and then I just sort of started saying, all right, so like these are fables. And it made sense to start out with the story called These Are the Fables. And then there was like, these are like really like, because I do a lot of that bodily, visceral stuff, but like 5 of them or 6 of them are just visceral. Like they're really bodily. And I had this sense of like, you know, if you're interested in that stuff, there's where to look for them. And conversely, if that stuff grosses you out, as some of my readers have said, that's the section to avoid. Like, the first story is called Viscera, so it should be pretty obvious. And it's kind of like a, you know, I ended up, it started to become more clear, and then like the first 6 stories were like, okay, these are like kind of big idea, like concept stories, and then the next ones were, they felt more like relationship stories or like traveling stories, or, and then the Fables, and the Viscera, and then the last was a little bit of a catch-all, but it was kind of like a, I don't remember what I ended up saying it was. What even is that? It's like a story about a pilot. It's a thank you. It's like endings kind of thing. Yeah. So as evidenced, like for me anyway, I think that for a lot, I do know a lot of writers. Like Charlie Baxter has a collection that's really carefully, collected around ideas like that. I'm pretty envious of that, because I kind of am just like, this is what I wrote. And if Bartholomew hadn't stolen 40 stories, I would have called it 38 stories and just like, like enjoy. But yeah, it works for me in the end to kind of arrange like that. And I'm sort of doing that now with the novel. I'm at the point where I'm taking, everything's pretty much set, but I'm taking the first paragraph and the last paragraph of each chapter and putting it on the wall. There's 98 chapters, it turns out. And I'm kind of like switching them around a little bit. Yeah, it helps to do first and last for me. Yes.
In a couple of the reviews I was reading online, there seemed to be this naming of kind of misandry present in the text.
Mm-hmm.
And I was curious, I found it interesting in this kind of cultural moment where male fragility is at the forefront of this wider discussion around gender. So I was wondering, did you write these stories kind of cognizant of this discussion or in conversation to this like emergent discourse of male fragility?
Yeah. So this book came out in 2015. Oh, that was just last year. But some of these stories feel older. Some of them are 7 years old at this point. So that conversation was starting to happen. I feel like it's kind of reached a nice peak, or maybe really was peaking last year when all the interviewers were thinking of their questions for the book. But yeah, I mean, I'm really interested in a masochistic way in like comment sections of like Daily Mail articles. I'm fascinated by like mob mentality in, kind of in culture, and the way we kind of gather around ideas, and how like a scandalous idea like rallies a frothing group around it, and so that generally interests me. I found, as an aside, when I'm writing really popular, when I feel like I'm writing like about culture, it always ends up being like a screenplay, and usually it's just like a speck of Black Mirror, which I just cannot stop writing episodes of. So that's kind of interesting, I guess. But like when I'm writing fiction, it feels a little bit more like, I don't know, like nuanced. So like the one that people ask me about a lot was, what's the one, 50 Ways to Eat Your Lover, which was started as a joke, it's off of that song, right? And I think we get it. And then as I was writing it, I was like, this could be really dark and sad. Like a lot of my stories are dark and sad, and people who don't deserve to get murdered by people who are doing the murdering. But then like 50 Ways was like, it's so violent and so like, like you're literally 50 different ways to kill a guy, was the working title. Just kidding, that was not the working title. But it became like this very straightforward, just like love story. It's like they meet, they fall in love, and there's this sort of romantic peak. They kind of break up, and then they get back together, and then get married, and then she dies of cancer. It's just like this beautiful love story to me. So I was. I thought it was funny. I figured more people would just kind of get the joke and just like move on. But I think you're right in that it like kind of hit this peak with that conversation. And I don't mind being part of the conversation. That's an interesting thing about writing. Is like it kind of pulls things out of you that you didn't think, and it draws things. People draw things out of it they didn't intend. So. I had a professor once, I had a teacher once, high school teacher, who said, if I see it and you see it, then it's there. Which was I thought, a beautiful idea, and still is. but that could be extrapolated in an interesting way to how our culture deals with ideas lately. There was one back there. You still got it? I'm pointing at you.
Yeah. I'm wondering if, with genre classification, if that's something you tend to resist or if you ever find it useful.
Yeah, it depends. I think when I was first starting out, my first big publications were like in humor kind of magazines, and McSweeney's, Monkey Bicycle, and the other big one was like Swivel or Swink, a now defunct magazine. And someone referred to me as a lady humorist, which was cool because I traveled to the 1890s to receive the title. But it was weird because I was like, okay, well now I'm a lady humorist. What do I do? And then I kind of wrote this funny but weird collection, and then I started being called an absurdist, and getting compared to those guys, mostly guys. I was compared to, and then I sort of chafed at that. I think that we're all different, but myself as a writer, I sort of, as soon as someone tells me what I'm doing, I don't like it. And so I started writing darker and darker and more violent, and and there was what was that essay that Claire Faye Watkins wrote about pandering? That got me. Check that one out, because I was doing some of that, but it was for me it was in the name of like chafing at these other things I was getting called, and things I was calling myself, and like calling myself out, and being like, okay, I'm not writing violent because I'm scared my mom's gonna read this and be worried about this. Why am I doing in good conscience as an artist doing that? Like, come on, like get it together, Gray. And then I'd write a super violent story, and I'd be like, Mom, check out this story. Just like God, teenage rebellion never ends. And so yeah, and now I'm like the Queen of Darkness. So it's like perfect time to write a really mannered historical fiction novel, in my opinion. Weird. So it's this kind of interesting like pivot turn, and then also in a more in a less reactionary sense, it's like being in like writing dark and weird and doing that for many years. You tire of it a little bit as just a genre, and you kind of have done what you can do at the moment, and you turn. I don't know. I look at I think about Joyce Carol Oates for the old pivot, blonde and zombie, and this kind of like crazy, career.
One or two more questions, anybody else?
I guess I'm interested, you talked about the story collection, but why you chose Gutshot as the title.
Oh yeah. Yeah, that's kind of a fun story. I was calling this collection In the Moment for like years, and my boyfriend was like, not a good title. And I was like, I know. In the Moment feels like, one of the stories is called In the Moment. I like that story. I like the title for the story, but as a collection, ugh. I don't know. I feel like it should have like a Nagel print on the cover. It's like very 80s. At the last, it was probably like the last month I had the book, I was like had gotten up in the morning, and the first thing I thought was like, the collection's called Gutshot. I didn't have a story called Gutshot, so I was like, what is a story called Gutshot about? And it's like about a guy who like shoots a guy in the gut, and then what? So I don't know. I wrote that story very fast, and it's really short. Maybe it is the shortest one, but Gutshot. I was like, that sounds good. Is it a word? Is it a title of another book? Yes, no, great. No, that was kind of it. I'm still kind of like I don't know, easing into calling this book Isadora. I want to call it something like Sea of Waves, or something like really like huge, like the body is a column. Fuckers, listen up, because it's like so huge in my mind, But anyway, but it's like, it's about Isadora, it's called Isadora, and I'm just gonna deal with that. Welcome to my process. Yeah.
What was the true thing in the Dunkin Donuts?
I was waiting for that. It was that I was in the parking lot of the Dunkin Donuts in Beaumont, Texas, and I found a pregnancy test in the parking lot that was positive. I was like, you can't not write a story about that.
Okay, let's give Amelia a minute. We have a reception right next door. Please come, and I believe that you guys actually prepared food for the reception.
Oh.
So very special.
Thank you.
Come and enjoy, and hopefully we'll have